As I stepped inside, clutching one of my precious jars filled with the homeland's dust, the low murmur of voices swelled into a restless tide. Faces etched with hardship and worry turned towards me, some hopeful, others hardened by years of disappointment and drought. At the far end, Elder Kadir sat with a stooped posture that seemed carved by the relentless sun and the burden of years. His sharp eyes, cold and calculating, flicked towards me as I took my place before the gathered villagers. The room was dim, lit only by a few sputtering oil lamps whose flickering flames cast long shadows on the cracked walls. The air held a brittle tension, as if the very fabric of our community was stretched thin by the drought and the battles waging within our hearts. I felt my pulse quicken, the jar growing heavier in my hands, not from the dust inside, but from the weight of expectation pressing down on me. Elder Kadir rose slowly, his voice dry and resolute, like the cracked earth beneath our feet. "We must face the truth," he began, addressing the room with a grim authority. "The rains have not come for years, and there is no sign that they will return. Our crops fail, our wells run dry, and our children grow weak. It is time to abandon these futile hopes and accept the reality that this drought is our new existence." A hush fell over the crowd, the room filled with a silence so deep it seemed to swallow even the faint rustle of shifting feet. I could see the cracks in faces that once held faith, lines of worry deepening around eyes that had prayed too long. But I could not remain silent. Holding the jar close, I found my voice, soft but unwavering. "My father taught me that the rain will come again," I said, feeling the eyes of the villagers settle on me. "He promised that these jars, these grains of dust are not empty. They hold the memory of rain, the seed of hope. If we give up now, if we surrender to despair, then we lose not just the rain, but the spirit of our village." Murmurs spread through the crowd, some whispered words of encouragement, others scoffed or shook their heads. Elder Kadir's gaze sharpened as he responded, "Hope alone will not fill our wells or feed our children. We must be practical. We must prepare to survive this drought, not cling to promises that may never be fulfilled." Lina, sitting quietly near me, reached out beneath the rough wooden table to squeeze my hand, a small gesture that steadied my trembling. Her gentle eyes met mine, full of unspoken understanding and quiet strength. In that moment, I felt the fragile thread of our family's hope entwined with the fate of the village. Jamal stood at the side of the room, restless and tense. His gaze burned with frustration, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles whitened. His defiance was a sharp contrast to the wary acceptance in many faces. He paced in short bursts, his rebellious spirit a mirror to the conflict raging inside me. The council meeting stretched on, voices rising and falling like the shifting desert winds. Some villagers sided with Kadir, demanding a pragmatic approach to survival, while others clung to my words, yearning for a flicker of light in the relentless darkness. The rift between hope and despair was no longer hidden. It lay bare and raw. As the meeting drew to a close, I realized the enormity of the path before me. To carry my father's promise was to bear the weight of not only memory, but the fragile future of our people. The jars in my hands were more than vessels of dust. They were symbols of resistance against the silence of the sky. Walking home under a sky that held no stars, I felt the stirrings of a fierce determination. The road ahead was uncertain, the voices of doubt loud, but my hope, like the dust in my jars, was unyielding. I would not let the flame of belief be extinguished, no matter how dark the night or how harsh the wind. And so, beneath the endless stretch of barren sky, I whispered my vow once more, a quiet prayer carried on the desert breeze. The rain will come again. We must believe, or we will surely be lost. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows over the cracked earth, when I returned to the little clearing where I kept my jars. The wind had stilled, leaving the air heavy with dust and the sharp scent of dry leaves. My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted a clean jar from the worn cloth that protected it from the relentless sun. Each jar was both a vessel and a prayer, a fragile promise caught in glass. I paused a moment, watching the reddish dust swirl softly inside before sealing it tight. This ritual was my rebellion against the silence of the sky, the stillness that had settled over our village for so long. Jommel was there, leaning against a battered wooden post. His eyes followed my every move, restless but attentive. "Still filling jars with dust?" he asked, his voice low but edged with a frustration I had come to expect. I met his gaze without flinching. "It's not just dust," I said softly. "It's memory. It's hope." He scoffed, but there was something behind his words that I couldn't quite place, perhaps a reluctant respect, or the ache of his own uncertainty. "Hope won't fill these jars with water," he muttered. "Maybe not today," I whispered, "but one day they will." Jommel shook his head, a flicker of bitterness crossing his sharp features. Yet, when the wind picked up again, scattering dust around us, he moved to help me cover the jars with a coarse cloth, his hands steady despite his words. Later, as the sky deepened to a bruised purple, I found Lina waiting in the doorway of our small home. Her soft features held the weight of years, but her eyes shone with a quiet strength. She motioned me inside, where the scent of dried herbs and warm bread offered a fragile comfort. "You were wearing yourself thin," she said gently, her hands folding mine in hers. "These jars, this hope, it's precious, but you must remember to live beyond them too." I nodded, feeling the familiar ache of responsibility settle heavier on my shoulders. Lina had been my anchor since father disappeared into the desert. Her balance of hope and realism was the thread that held our fragile family together. That night, I lay awake listening to the distant murmurs of the village, some prayers, some curses, all entwined in the harsh silence of drought. My collection of jars sat lined across the windowsill, catching the faint moonlight like a constellation of tiny stars. Each one held a flicker of belief, a defiant pulse against the creeping despair. I wondered how long that flicker could last. How long before even I might falter, swallowed by the dust and silence. But as the wind whispered through the cracked walls of our home, I pressed my hand to a jar, feeling the cold glass beneath my palm. "Not yet," I told the night. "Not yet." Outside, Jammel's footsteps faded into the darkness, carrying with them the restless spirit of our village, fragile, uncertain, but not yet broken. And so I continued, gathering dust, sealing hope, and holding fast to the promise that one day the jars would brim with rain. The horizon was no longer a distant line, but a swirling mass of ochre and dust, a heavy curtain creeping steadily towards our village. From the moment I noticed the sky darkening, a shiver of unease settled deep in my chest. The wind was changing. It carried the sharp tang of grit and the low, relentless whisper of a gathering storm. It was not rain, not yet, but something far more threatening. A sandstorm was coming. The village stirred with a mix of urgency and dread. Mothers called their children indoors, men hurried to reinforce walls and shutter windows. The air was thick with the scent of dry earth, and the sharp sound of hurried footsteps echoed beneath the darkening sky. I clutched my father's promise tightly, feeling the weight of it as I moved among my jars, each one a small sanctuary of dust from our homeland. They glinted faintly in the fading light, fragile and precious, as if they might shatter at the slightest breath. "Mira, come help me secure the shutters." Lina's voice broke through my thoughts, steady but edged with worry. Her hands, weathered yet gentle, moved with practiced efficiency, tying ropes and fitting wooden planks against the walls. I nodded, my fingers lingering on a jar shaped like a teardrop, the dust inside swirling gently with the rising wind. Outside, Elder Kadyr's voice rose above the growing clamor. "Order!" "Calm. We will face this storm with clear heads," he commanded, his sharp eyes scanning the gathering crowd. His presence was a stark reminder of the divisions beneath our fragile unity. He was the voice of pragmatism, insisting we prepare for survival, not for dreams of reign that had long since failed us. I saw him speak to the men, directing them to reinforce the granary and the well, a grim task given the dryness that had withered both. His stern face was a mask of grim resolve, but I caught a flicker of something softer, a shadow of the hopeful youth he once was. Yet now, he seemed determined to snuff out the fragile sparks of hope that my father's legacy had kindled. Jamal appeared beside me, his lean frame tense, eyes burning with restless energy. "Why do you bother with these jars?" he asked, gesturing sharply to my collection. "They were just dust. The rain is never coming." His voice was harsh, but beneath it lay a desperate longing to believe otherwise. "They were not just dust," I said softly, meeting his gaze. "They hold the memory of rain, a promise my father made. And as long as I have them, I have hope." He scoffed but didn't move away. Instead, he offered a hand. "Let me help. Even if it's just dust, it's all we have left." Together, we moved quickly, securing the jars in the safest corner of my small home. Each one felt heavier than before, not with dust, but with the weight of expectation. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it the relentless bite of sand. The village walls trembled under the storm's growing fury. Inside, Lena lit a small lamp, its flickering flame a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. "We must hold fast," she murmured, her eyes reflecting both fear and fierce determination. I nodded, feeling the pulse of my own resolve echo hers. The storm was a living thing, its breath hot and abrasive as it battered the village. The dust filled the air, stinging eyes and choking lungs, but it could not touch the steadfast hope cradled within these jars. As the night deepened, I sat amidst them, whispering promises and prayers, my voice barely audible over the storm's roar. What would become of us after this night? Would the jars survive? Would the village endure? These questions churned like the tempest outside, but I refused to let despair claim me. The storm on the horizon was not just a threat, it was a test, and I was ready to face it, for the sake of rain yet to come. As the first grains of sand slipped through the cracks in the door, I closed my eyes and imagined the sky weeping again, soft and life-giving. The storm raged on, but inside, a quiet flame burned, steady, a flicker of hope against the endless desert night. Outside, the village held its breath. Inside, I held my jars, and in the heart of the storm I found a fierce, fragile determination that would not be broken. The wind had finally stilled, leaving a thick, choking silence in its wake. The sun, a pale disk behind a veil of dust, cast a muted glow over the village, where the remnants of the sandstorm lay scattered like forgotten memories. Mira's feet crunched softly on the gritty earth as she made her way toward the small wooden shelf that held her collection of jars. Each one was a fragile vessel, heavy with dust and heavier still with the weight of promise. She approached slowly, heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. The air was still tinged with the scent of earth and sand, a raw, primal aroma that spoke of the desert's harsh embrace. Her eyes scanned the line of jars, each one shimmering faintly in the dim light, until they stopped abruptly on a single vessel. A thin, jagged crack marred its surface, a pale fracture that ran from rim to base. Dust fine and pale as the desert itself trickled slowly from the breach, scattering like fallen stars onto the ground. Mira's breath caught in her throat. The jar, one of the oldest, one that held the dust from the sacred grounds where her father had last stood, was broken. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, the fragile glass cool beneath her touch. She pressed lightly against the crack. The jar shuddered, threatened to shatter completely. Panic knotted inside her chest. How could this happen? How could something so precious be so vulnerable? The village, too, felt shattered in that moment, as if the cracked jar was a mirror reflecting the fragile state of their existence. The relentless drought had worn them down, sapping strength and spirit. The sandstorm was a cruel reminder that nature was indifferent to their prayers. At home, Lena was waiting. She noticed the dust clinging to Mira's clothes, the haunted look in her dark eyes. Without a word, she led Mira inside, where the air was cooler and the shadows deeper. Lena's hands, roughened by years of toil yet gentle as ever, carefully wiped the dust from Mira's scraped palms. "It's not just the jar that's cracked, is it?" Lena whispered, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath. She sat beside Mira, pulling her close. But hope is not so easily broken. Mira leaned into the warmth, the tenderness a balm against the storm raging inside her. She wanted to believe Lina, to cling to the fragile thread that tethered them to the promise of rain. But doubt gnawed like a silent predator. The next day, the village gathered for a council meeting beneath the great acacia tree, its skeletal branches reaching skyward like desperate hands. Elder Kadir stood at the center, his stooped form casting a long shadow. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, fixed on Mira as she stepped forward, clutching the cracked jar carefully. "This jar is broken," Kadir said, voice low but carrying the weight of finality. "Like the dreams of rain that once filled our hearts. We cannot build our lives on shattered promises." Mira's voice wavered but did not break. "The jar is cracked, yes. But it still holds the dust of our land, the memory of what was and what could be. My father taught me that hope is not the absence of hardship, but the courage to keep believing in spite of it." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some nodding in quiet agreement, others casting wary looks toward Kadir. The rift between hope and pragmatism yawned wider, threatening to swallow the fragile unity the village had left. After the council, Mira retreated to the outskirts of the village, where the sky bruised with the colors of dusk. The cracked jar sat beside her, catching the dying light. Dust shimmered faintly within, a delicate glow that defied the damage. She traced the fracture with her finger, feeling the sharp edge beneath her skin. Her thoughts swirled like the winds that had just passed, a tempest of fear, loss, and stubborn hope. Could she carry this weight alone? Could the village survive the fractures in their faith? Yet in the stillness, a quiet flame flickered to life within her, a promise whispered on the desert breeze. She spoke softly to the jar, to the dust, to the memory of her father. "I will keep you safe. I will keep us safe. Even if the rain does not come tomorrow, it may come someday. And until then, I will hold this promise, cracked but unbroken, like my heart." Night deepened around her, but Mira did not move. The cracked jar was a wound, yes, but it was also a symbol, a testament to endurance, to the fragile beauty of hope in a barren world. And as the stars blinked awake in the endless sky, Mira made a silent vow to keep the faith alive, no matter the cost. The village meeting place, a once proud stone hall now cracked and weathered by years of drought and sandstorms, held a tense gathering under a sky that refused to weep. The air inside was thick with dust and unease, voices low but charged, as if the very walls absorbed the desperation of the crowd. I stood near the center, clutching my jar of dust, the weight of it, both comforting and heavy in my hands. The room smelled of dry earth and sweat, a scent that had become all too familiar. Faces circled around me, some hopeful, many wary, and others marked by a cold pragmatism that chilled my heart. Elder Kadir sat at the head of the council, his stooped form a silhouette against the cracked plaster wall. His sharp eyes scanned the room, settling finally on me. When he spoke, his voice was low but carried the authority of years hardened by drought and disappointment. "Mira," he began, his tone edged with a firmness that brooked no argument, "the time has come to face reality. This endless waiting, this clinging to promises of rain, it threatens the survival of our village. We cannot build our future on shadows and dust." I felt a tremor in my chest but steadied my breath. "Elder Kadir," I said softly, "the jars I carry are not just dust. They are the memory of our land, the faith we hold. My father believed in the return of rain, and so do I. If we surrender now, what remains for us?" A murmur rippled through the room. Some villagers nodded, eyes glimmering with a flicker of the hope I clung to. Others, hardened by years of loss, shifted uncomfortably, their doubt palpable. Kadir's gaze sharpened. "Faith is not enough, child. We must adapt or perish. The rains will not return in our lifetime. We have crops to save, water to ration. Your jars will not fill themselves." I swallowed the lump of fear rising in my throat, feeling the weight of his words like a scorching wind. Yet, beneath the surface, my resolve burned brighter. But without hope, What are we saving ourselves for? If we lose faith, we lose the will to endure. My father taught me that the desert only seems barren until it remembers how to weep again. The room fell silent, the tension thickening like the dust storms that swept through our village. Then, from the back, Jamal's voice cut sharply through the stillness. "Faith won't fill our bellies or mend our cracked homes," he said, his tone bitter and restless. He stepped forward, eyes blazing with frustration. "We talk of promises and memories, but what of action? We can't wait for rain that may never come. I say we find a way out, start anew elsewhere." Some villagers grumbled in agreement. Others shook their heads in dismay. Jamal's defiance was a crack in the fragile unity we had left. I looked at Jamal, seeing the fire in his eyes that mirrored my own, though fueled by anger instead of hope. "Running away won't save us," I replied quietly. "Leaving means abandoning those who still believe, those who need us to hold on." Lina, standing beside me, placed a steady hand on my shoulder. Her eyes, soft but resolute, met mine. She whispered, "Hold fast, Mira. They need your strength now more than ever." The council meeting stretched on, voices rising and falling like the desert winds outside. Arguments for pragmatism clashed with pleas for faith. The village seemed to fracture before my eyes, the bonds of community strained by fear and despair. When the meeting finally adjourned, I stepped outside into the cool twilight. The sky was a deep indigo, scattered with stars that watched silently over our broken village. Jamal lingered nearby, his jaw tight, the tension between us unspoken but heavy. "I want to believe," he said after a moment, voice rough with emotion. "But sometimes it feels like hope is a chain that keeps us trapped here, waiting for a miracle that won't come." I met his gaze, searching for the boy I had known before the drought hardened his heart. "Maybe hope is a chain," I admitted softly, "but it's the only one strong enough to hold us together when everything else falls apart." He looked away, the fight in him not yet extinguished, but tempered by something quieter, more uncertain. That night, as I lay beneath the thin blanket of stars, I held my dust jar close. The cracked walls of the village felt more fragile than ever, but within me a stubborn flame flickered. I was no longer just a child collecting dust. I was the keeper of a promise older than the drought, a bearer of hope in a place that had almost forgotten how to dream. The road ahead was uncertain, the village divided and wounded, but I would not let despair win. For in the silent jars, in the dry earth beneath my feet, and in the quiet faith of those who still believed, there was a seed of something waiting to bloom again. And I would gather every grain until the rain returned, or until I could no longer hold the hope alone. As the first cool breeze of dawn stirred the desert air, I whispered a vow to the sky, to my father, and to the dust that cradled our future. We will endure, we will remember, and one day the rain will come. The desert's silence had grown thicker lately, an oppressive stillness that wrapped around the village like a suffocating shroud. Mira felt it in her bones as she walked the cracked earth, the dust swirling faintly at her feet despite the calm air. Each day the sky remained an unyielding expanse of pale, unbroken blue, a vast, merciless void that seemed to mock the prayers whispered beneath it. It was this silence that drove her feet towards the one place she believed might still hold answers, or at least the remnants of a faith older than any drought. The dwelling of old Seer Yara. The path to Yara's hut was etched into the rocky hills outside the village. A narrow trail lined with brittle thorn bushes and scattered shards of pottery worn smooth by time. Mira's sandals crunched softly on the gravel as she approached, the sun sinking low behind distant dunes, casting a golden haze that blurred the horizon. The air was thick with dust, the faint scent of sage and dried earth rising from the cracked ground. Yara's hut was a humble structure, patched with sun-baked mud and weathered wood. Its crooked silhouette leaned slightly, as if bowing to the weight of years she had endured. Mira paused at the threshold, her heart beating with a mixture of reverence and uncertainty. The old woman's reputation was as much a part of village lore as the vanished rains themselves a keeper of secrets, a weaver of stories, a bridge between what was and what might be. Inside, the dim room was lit by a single flickering candle whose flame danced in the gentle draught. The walls were lined with shelves bearing ancient scrolls, brittle manuscripts, and countless jars filled with powders, herbs, and Mira's gaze lingered here, dust collected from the farthest reaches of the desert. The faint scent of dried lavender and myrrh filled the air, mingling with the musty odor of aged parchment. Old Seer Yara sat cross-legged on a woven mat, her stooped frame draped in faded robes the color of desert clay. Her eyes, clouded with age yet sharp and penetrating, regarded Mira with quiet curiosity. When she spoke, her voice was low and gravelly, each word deliberate as if drawn from the depths of memory itself. "You carry the weight of the past in those jars, child," she said, nodding toward Mira's bundle. "But the dust alone does not summon the rain. It is the remembering the ritual that stirs the sky's heart." Mira settled beside her, the rough mat prickling her sun-warmed skin. "But the sky is silent, Yara. The drought grows fiercer with each passing day. How can memory fight such emptiness?" The old seer's gaze drifted toward the small window, where the last light of day faded into shadows. "The sky's silence is a test, a long sleep from which it must awaken. It waits for those who will not forget." Yara reached out and placed a gnarled hand atop one of the jars. "These vessels you fill with dust, they are prayers, offerings to the memory of rain. Each grain a story, a longing, a promise. But to keep the faith alive, you must also carry the stories, the songs, the ceremonies, the sacred acts that bind us to the water that once was and may be again." Mira listened, the old woman's words weaving a tapestry of hope and history. She spoke of ancient rains and gods whose blessings had once turned barren earth into blossoming fields. She told of rituals long forgotten by many but preserved in the folds of Yara's memory, dances beneath the full moon, chants that called the clouds, the planting of sacred seeds in cracked earth. As the candle flickered, Mira felt a strange warmth rise within her chest, a fragile flame, kindled by the connection between past and present, belief and survival. The old seer's stories were not mere fables. They were the lifeblood of a people who refused to surrender to the desert's cruelty. When Mira finally rose to leave, the night had draped the village in a blanket of cool darkness. The stars above were hidden behind a veil of dust, and the sky was an unbroken void. She clutched her smallest dust jar tightly, its weight a tangible reminder of her promise and her burden. Outside, the desert breathed in silence. The wind whispered softly, lifting grains of sand that sparkled faintly in the moonlight. Mira stood still for a moment, feeling the vast emptiness around her and the steady beat of her own heart. "The sky may be silent," she whispered to the night, "but I will not be." The desert's silence was vast and deep, but within Mira, a quiet resolve was growing. She understood now that hope was not simply waiting for rain to fall, but nurturing the memory and ritual that would one day awaken the sky's forgotten song. The jars of dust were more than vessels, they were the threads that wove her family's faith into the fabric of the village's soul. As she walked back through the sleeping village, Mira glimpsed faint outlines of homes, their cracked walls bathed in silver light, and heard the distant, soft breathing of those who still clung to fragile dreams. The weight of the drought pressed heavy, but in the hush of night, she sensed the stirrings of something unseen, a flicker of life beneath the desert's quiet. Her footsteps echoed softly on the hard earth, a rhythm steady and sure. Mira was no longer just a child gathering dust. She was a keeper of memory, a bearer of hope, a small flame against the vast darkness, and as long as she breathed, the promise of rain would not be forgotten. The night had been suffocatingly still, the kind of silence that presses down like a heavy stone on the chest. I lay awake, listening to the faint scraping sounds beyond the thin walls of our hut, sounds that prickled at my skin like the whisper of a desert wind. It was Jamal. I knew it before I opened my eyes. He was moving, restless and desperate, moving with a purpose that frightened me. By the faint glow of the oil lamp outside, I slipped from my bed and